Yeah, while we were recording that, I kicked the wall and the wall fell down. I've got a big pile of wall on the floor right now.
So Microsoft drops a bombshell this week, another bombshell. They declared that they were making a round of redundancies. It's another round of redundancies, but this
Another one.
time, another one. Yeah. So let's take stock of this. I think back in 2023 was their first round of this batch, and they got rid of 10,000 people. I think in 2023, they got rid of 1,000 people in January. Another 5,000 people were announced in May, and this was 9,000 got announced this week or the end of last week. So basically, since 2023, it's like 24,000, 25,000 roles have gone. But and that's obviously very sad. And we do know some people in those teams, and obviously wish them all the best of luck as they hunt for new opportunities. What's kind of interesting, I guess, in this context is the week before, the president of their developer division announced or leaked a memo. And that memo basically said that AI is no longer optional, and that AI adoption was going to be a metric that was going to be tracked in their review process, because AI is now fundamentally part of the way that we work. And that's interesting because when Microsoft announced this latest round of redundancies, I quote, they said they were going to be focused in the areas where they could end or decrease work, which is kind of what we've been talking about roundabout over the last few months on this.
End work. What does that mean?
The idea that AI and generative AI, I guess, where we've very much been focused in the last year or so, was very much about efficiency, enabling you to do more. This seems to be much more focused around what's coming off the back of the growing wave of agents and agentic, and the ability for the AI to do things on your behalf. So the work is fading into the background, and your intent is what's driving it. And they seem to be looking for the low-hanging fruit where this is possible, where you can start moving the work and offloading the work onto the AI rather than enabling individuals to do more work, which I think is quite a subtle shift, but something that I think we're going to see increasingly more and more. That the wording was quite terrifying, and a number of the news outlets picked up on this. I saw it in the BuzzFeed reporting on it as well. The kind of the end or the decrease of work, which is quite chilling, really, quite chilling. But is this the early stages? Do you think?
I can't really work out what's going on, to be honest. So they've made all these redundancies, quarter after quarter. The revenue's going up, the profit's going up. So they're not cutting people because they need to drive profit. They're cutting people from some kind of strategic point of view. Now, lots of people argue, oh, well, there was loads of overhiring around the COVID time or pre-COVID or just after COVID. And then you look at the stats as well about how their headcount increased, over those years. And now some people like to paint this picture that this is just kind of correction. The business is growing, the kind of tech landscape is changing, and this is just a normal kind of correction.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't feel like a normal correction, though, does it? I mean, I do know personally quite a few people at Microsoft that have been affected by this. And I've never seen this level of cutting before. And it's not, obviously, we've talked about this before, it's not just Microsoft, it's all these kind of big tech companies. So yeah, what do they know that we don't, or are they just so big that these cuts are actually only sort of 5-10%, and that's in line with what everyone's going to be doing anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of that. They obviously are large, but equally, these big tech companies are the forerunners, aren't they? Often they will go early into the new tech because they have to kind of gamble on the next thing. But equally, they're the forerunners of what's going to happen to the rest of the economy. Often, if they're investing in new technology, they're using new products, they're doing new things, new ways of working. But the ones that stick will end up being rolled out and have vast impacts on everyone else. And I guess that kind of got me thinking a little bit, if Microsoft and the other big tech companies, as you say, if this is the forerunner of what's coming and they're just a bit ahead of everybody else because they're the ones really playing with the technology, what does it mean for the senior leaders that we're dealing with day to day. We talked about a few weeks ago how we were seeing at the beginning of the year, CIOs in particular were being elevated in the boardroom to beyond kind of the execution of a strategy to actually people were knocking on their door saying, what is the strategy for AI? How are we going to roll this out within our organization? What does it mean? What's it going to change? And that was very much in that era of that Gen AI piece. It was about efficiency. It was about how do we make our teams do more? What do our clients and customers expect? It must be more to this than just a Copilot license. And CIOs everywhere that we were talking to were still are struggling, I guess, to kind of know quite what to do with that. But while they're still wrestling with what on earth you do with an LLM and what Gen AI means, all of a sudden agents are turning up and threatening potentially to decrease work entirely. And the outcome is the reduction in the human headcount. And that's going to fall as part of this mix as well. So it's a really difficult time for people in leadership, I think, to understand quite which direction to go, because it's just moving so fast.
But perhaps it is more prevalent, or will be more prevalent, in the larger organizations, because I'm just thinking about how I understand the way Microsoft certainly used to work 5 years ago. The sales teams, for instance, would hunt in packs. So if you think about a typical account management team at Microsoft, it was pretty big. A technical solution specialist, you'd have a sales solution specialist, you'd have some account person. So, and then you've got people that are involved, maybe in that account, or maybe in another account. And so this team-based approach to tackling a problem, in this case sales, is ripe for the use of AI, because AI becomes part of your team. So you're not getting rid of all of the humans, but you are enabling the humans to do more work and perhaps think about things from different angles, or capture sentiment that, as long as you can codify it, you don't have to be the best skilled in that. So I can see how that you can potentially use it to thin out those sales and account teams. We're looking at it from a developer point of view, and the expectation, I would argue, is that over time, certainly over the next 5 years, senior developers and architects are going to be able to do a lot more. They're going to be orchestrating teams that don't just include teams of other developers, but predominantly teams of agents. A lot more kind of stuff that you could push into the background, a lot less need to farm stuff down to more junior members of the team. This is happening in consultancy right now, and I still don't understand really how this is working unless the world hasn't cottoned on yet. These big consultancy firms, again, their revenue is going up, their profits are going up, their headcount is going down, because more of their research is being outsourced to AI, but their prices haven't dropped. So people are still paying for the badge. They're paying for the ability to say, it wasn't my fault, they told me. But the consultancies are able to produce more work quicker.
I guess it's, in many ways, it's quite obvious where people's roles are being pulled apart, right? Because you need to think, how do we use the current wave of AI day to day? It's in that space where you're translating intent into action. Okay, it's where I would like you to achieve this, or I want to go and achieve this, and then you go through a bunch of steps to achieve the thing. But you've basically decided what needed to be done, and then you've worked out how to do it, and then you've done it. The whole back end of that process, working out how to do it and then doing it, is right in that sweet spot at the moment for what these new AI tools and techniques achieve. The decision of what to do, that's the magic, right? That's the bit the human still needs to do, and that's about the organization and trying to meet the goals and the aims of the organization. But taking that intent and delivering on it is where the tooling can really excel. And so I think you're right, in these organizations that have got larger teams where potentially the intent was decided by an individual, and then they had an army of worker bees who were then delivering on that intent.
The worker bees have gone.
Worker bees are getting gutted.
Yeah, I think that's what's true across the whole board. We're in the software development space. You've had a lot of talk on here about automated coding tools and vibe coding, and crikey, I mean, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll know what I think about that. But what it does do, and what these tools do, and what AI is doing, is it helps you get to first base a lot. So the trouble is, there's a lot of people that get to first base and they think they made it. And that's where my beef is. But they absolutely help you get to first base quicker. Now, at that point, you need some experience to come in, and you've got some stuff to bat around with, and you've got some stuff to perfect. But all that pre stuff you don't really need. I used deep research to create a marketing plan, and you didn't even have to write the prompts. I was like, right, write me a prompt for this product for deep research so that I can produce a well-researched marketing plan. That was the prompt. Produced a prompt that was like a page or 2 pages long, fed that into deep research. And then an hour later, it completely hands off. It comes back with a bunch of stuff. Now, I would have to go through that, and there'll be some bits that are good and some bits that are bad. Or maybe I'll run that same experiment on 2 or 3 other AIs, and I'll look across them and I'll pick what's best, what I think is best. But that is a hell of a lot of grunt work that has just been completely automated. Previously, as somebody that's not great at marketing, I wouldn't have known where to start, and I would have had to pay someone to go and do that.
Yeah.
And really, how could I judge whether the quality of what they're giving me is any better than the quality of what this is? You're going to do that based on their reputation, their case studies, previous results, that kind of thing. But I think the tech is getting good enough now where if all you need is good enough as a first base, then that's your default.
Yeah. It's that parallel threading actually is quite an interesting way of looking at it. It's the ability for you to set the tooling off on a particular task, a particular job that may well take half an hour, or whatever it is. And it's going to go off and do it in the background. You just need to wait for it to be done. And then you can go off and make a cup of tea or do something else. I was talking to one of our architects the other day about an engagement that we're on. And he was talking about exactly this. In that instance, he was reviewing a legacy code base for one of our customers and and figuring out the best way to approach how it worked, how it hung together, and then thinking about specific problems that might be there. One of the things he wanted to do was to test a theory about why something wasn't working, and he wanted to build a little test harness to kind of test this thing. And normally what he would do is either he'd take the time to do it himself, or more likely you'd get one of the other engineers or one of the junior guys to go and to generate some fake data, create a test harness and test his theory. Well, instead of doing that, he wrote a prompt, and essentially, and the whole thing popped into life with generated data with a test harness, and it proved its hypothesis or it didn't.
Right. In engineering terms, that is low-hanging fruit, isn't it? That's like, this is critical state stuff. I just need a test harness. It's donkey work. I need some fake data. And this is where, you can save hours of work without really having to worry about the consequences.
Yeah, and he didn't have to bother our other engineers in his team that have other things to do. He didn't have to bother the client's engineering team with whom we'd inherited this code base from. He could just do it, set it off running, and carry on with something else. And it saved so much time and so much friction. And it was incredible. It was that parallel path, and you can see all those areas where there would have been additional people, additional roles, the outcomes are the same, but the tools have enabled those people to be unmade in that instance. So you can see it, and I think that's what it is. I think that's what the end or the decrease of work.
End of work.
It's these things that are continually happening in the background, and I guess what we don't know yet, well, nobody knows yet, is how far that's going to encroach.
I have an issue. I do have an issue with this. I have an issue with this because I don't feel like I'm any closer to the end of work.
You're just doing different work.
So now I've got all these tools, and we're moving into this brave new world. It hasn't reduced any freaking work. It's just made loads more. I can get through a lot more, a lot quicker. But I am doing more now than I was 2 years ago. I'm going in the wrong direction. And I'm really struggling to understand why. We're the people that are going, oh yeah, AI is gonna give you back more time, and you're gonna have to hire less roles. There's a whole bunch of new possibilities and things that you can automate. But then you're spending all your time figuring that out and doing all the automation. So there is still this conflict where not most people, a lot of people in our sector are convinced that AI is going to reduce the amount of work. Now, maybe it reduces the amount of jobs, which is bad for all kinds of reasons. Bad for the economy. It's bad for like the throughput and the learning. One of the big problems is, okay, maybe we only need architects and senior people, or whatever your equivalent business is. They take 8 years to get to that level, but we're not hiring anybody now because we don't need those juniors. So in 8 years' time, we're all screwed. How do we figure that out? So the people that do have jobs, I think they're not. I don't think they're slowing down. I think that the expectation on them is getting more and more and more. And there is this. We have a history of ratcheting up work. Remember when the computer and the spreadsheet was meant to save us loads of time, and it just makes us twice as efficient, and so we're able to cram twice as much into every day.
Maybe it's okay though, because everyone just will burn out really quick. So everyone's careers are only going to be 10 years long because we're all completely fried by the amount of work we now have to do. But there's loads of people that haven't got jobs, so they can just replace us, right? So everyone's careers are shorter and they get thrown out, and we put in the next drone. Is that how it's going to work?
When we're mining those near Earth asteroids.
Exactly. So that I guess that's one part of the mix. One part of the mix is what individuals are going to do within our organizations, employment, that kind of thing. The other part of the mix, I think, which is something that we've come across, I think, recently, is what this is going to mean for the products and services that we're actually delivering. So what things are going to be used, what tools are going to be important, what's going to happen to the world of SaaS, what are people going to buy, if work is decreasing and the end of work is coming, the expectations that are within our employment is that it's being driven by our intent, and there's bots or AI or agents or whatever in the background delivering on that intent for us. Surely that expectation is also going to move into the marketplace, and very, very quickly. And we've seen this before in the history of technology. We saw this in mobile, for example. When mobile landed in the consumer space, that's really what drove the change in the workplace. People wanted that experience and that experience of technology, and they saw what happen internally. This time it feels like it's flipping. So the changes that are happening in industry, where work is being hollowed out, people being made redundant, and the types of roles and work we're being asked to do in the workplace is evolving and changing, and will continue to do so. That expectation is now going to be on the consumer end. Why have I got this to-do list which is making me create to-dos in a slightly more efficient way? That doesn't make any sense anymore. Why doesn't it just know and do it for me? Or why am I copying data from this box to this box to this box to this box? Why doesn't it just know that I want the form to go to HMRC? There's a shift, I think, in the products that we're going to be developing and what the consumer is going to want from those products and services that we really need to start considering and thinking about.
Yeah, I think this is that whole move towards ambient computing, where it's been a thing for a while, but AI has really brought it to the forefront. Why do I need these devices? Why can't they disappear into the background? Now, if you think about the habit changes we would have to go through to realize that reality there, and how bad humans are at changing habits and how long it takes them, then we're not going to get there overnight, but it does seem to be the direction of travel. I've talked about this quite a lot in some of the articles I've written and some of the thinking that we've been doing. We talk about kind of building a Starship enterprise for every enterprise. We talk about, the fact that CRUD SaaS apps, a lot of SaaS apps, a lot of CRUD apps are just hacks. The reason we have an app or a lot of apps, especially in the business space, is because we need to get data into a system, and we're humans, so we need to be filtered through a kind of form or a pipeline or a process, and then that system can do something with the data. And then when we need to get data out of the system, it has to be squirted back into a rigid form. So a lot of these SaaS apps, they give you an interface to kind of input that data, play with that data, view that data. Great, but that's because that's the only way of doing it. Really, if you think about my favorite metaphor, right? If you think about Star Trek and the way that the entire spaceship is essentially run by voice command. I mean, there are some nice holographic interfaces and occasional buttons too, but Picard shows the era of my kind of particular Trekkiness, I guess. Will speak to the computer and ask him about what the engines are doing, and the Star Trek computer is able to interrogate these systems via some mechanism and speak those results back to the captain. And when speaking isn't enough, it's able to project a star map of the galaxy, and you can spin it around and all that kind of stuff. The point is, the computer is not there, or it's a glowing bulb, or it's the interface is the voice. The magic that happens between taking the intent, the data you're putting into the system, querying the data that's in the system, and then getting it back to you, there is nothing hard coded. There is no rigid interface or forms. There is a display that's sometimes rendered completely on the fly based on the data and the need for that data from the intent that you gave it. So I see this very much as this is the ultimate aim of agentic computing, is to minimize the amount of hacks we need when we're interacting with stuff. And I think some people have woken up to that. Okay, back with Siri and Alexa in the early versions of those, I think there was people that kind of really jumped on that and said, this is happening, this is now. And then we all realized that actually they're a bit rubbish and they don't really understand us. And there's no agentic layer there, right? So there's no plug-in ability to plug in those those layers of intelligence that can deal with different kinds of systems and different kinds of data to the extent that we need them to. And that's all changing. And so I do think that we're going to see the ambient computing dream becoming much more real. And over time, and it's going to take a long time, I guess maybe we'll be weaned off our screens and our devices, or we'll learn to become less dependent on them. Apps will still exist, but will you see them? Will they have a face?
Yeah. I think certainly in the near term, we're going to be weaned off our addiction to form filling. I mean, the form filling is the biggest hack, right? As you say, it doesn't matter if it's a business app or any other kind of app, where you're booking a holiday, or whether you're filling in an appraisal, or you're sending a tax return, or whatever you're doing, you're filling in forms. And to be honest, we're already at the stage where it's getting in the way. It's just getting, we need the data to get out of here and into there. And I don't want to fill in the form to do it. There must be a better way.
So I think this is actually a good concrete example of what I'm talking about. We've gone through our appraisals recently. So my direct reports, I have to gone through this brand new appraisal process. It was quite hardcore. Well, the way this works was essentially lots of stuff happened, lots of peer reviews were made, lots of people filled in lots of forms, and then I was presented with this mass of data, right? And it was all formatted in these forms, so I could click through all these different things, right? Person A said this about person B, person C said this about person B, and then they had to give their self-appraisal too in a form, and I had to give a manager appraisal in a form. But to do that manager appraisal, I had to look through 10 plus peer reviews that have been done on this person, look at it in these boxes, look at this, their own self-review in these boxes. So it's very rigid. They could only say what they're allowed to say within these boxes. Mm-hmm. And then I had to give my response in these boxes. It was so hard to take this mess of a brain and a mess of thoughts and all this stuff that's going on up here, to process all that information, to put it back in those boxes. The first one I did, and I don't know if he listens, but I did explain to him the other day, this is the first one I did. I did it the old-fashioned way. I read all the things and I thought deeply about what I wanted to say, or maybe not as deeply as I should have done. And then I wrote in the moment. And so actually what I wrote down was, you could argue, with perhaps not the best finessed and quite raw, probably quite kind of from here. And that whole process took me 2 hours for one person. And then I thought, oh God, I've got like six others still. I can't do this. I've got time to do this. So I flipped the approach, and that thought process I was having with myself, which, how do I describe this thing in terms of these boxes? I just got rid of that, and right, I'm going to talk to my AI, and I'm going to say, well, I need to do a review about this person. This is what I think about this person. This is some of the things that his peers are saying, some things that, have happened over the last 6 months. I think, blah, blah, blah. Rambling conversation. My thoughts went everywhere, but it didn't matter because it just captured all of it. And the first time I did this, I tried to get it just to fit those thoughts straight into those boxes. And that wasn't great. I asked it then to take my rambling thoughts and turn that into a performance review or an annual review for this person, a quite detailed one. And it did a brilliant job. Right, it took my rambling thoughts and it turned it into something that was really legible, and pretty much, there were a couple of mistakes, but it was pretty much quite truthful and quite a good presentation back to me of where this person was at. Now, I think that report that I generated would have probably been more valuable to the person on the receiving end than what I ended up having to give that person. Because then I had to take that, and I was able to use the AI to say, right, this is the format of our review process. I need this, but in this format. And so then it spat it out, and I was able to copy and paste it back into this form. And as I got quite good at this, most of the time, therefore, ended up the conversation happened good. I quite enjoyed having the conversation. Everything else was just work. It was busy work after that point because all my thoughts had already gone out. So at the end, most of the work was in copy and pasting back between these boxes. And I think that's ridiculous. Why have we now, instead of this hacky SaaS product that we're using and we needed to use, this is just getting in the way. I can go straight from thought to whatever the eventual output is, and everything in the middle is just a waste of effort. And I wonder how quickly everyone's going to realize that we're there with these SaaS tools and they're not working for us anymore. They're getting in the way.
And we're already feeling it. Right now, we've been in this world for some months. We're probably some months ahead of most of the population, and we can see the bottleneck is in this horrible SaaS product that we used to like more than the horrible SaaS product we used before. Now both of these, the mainstream products that do HR and appraisal stuff, and I'm sure they've invested millions of dollars in perfecting the workflow of those form fields and making sure the button colors are just right and the call to action are in the right place and the side-by-side views track and line up properly so you can analyze it properly. And they've focused so much on that experience. And we went through the effort only recently of moving from one major provider to another major provider that's got a slightly better way of flowing forms together, basically. And now, only a few months in, having spent months in the world of AI and LLMs and automation and agents and the rest of it, we're like, the problem is the product. Like, it's in the way. This is not the way the world should work. And we can see that. And I think the rest of the world is probably not very, very much further behind. And which is really interesting if you're a product owner at this point.
What's important, and that won't change, is the process, right? The process of the annual review is important. 1, gather peer feedback. 2, assess the peer feedback. 3, collect self-feedback from report. 4, create your review. So that process is important, but the forms and the software that we're using now get in the way of doing that process quicker, because we can do that process quicker if we have an AI native way of doing it. And there's this kind of meme, isn't it, where everything's just a ChatGPT wrapper. But that's kind of like what you want most of the time now, because everything else is just getting in the way. If I had something that looked like a chat app, but it forced me through the same process, but that process was all kind of voice native, and it still outputted me a report either in kind of the full-on format or a particular format that I could dictate. That is a better user experience than the one I had where I was forced through this rigid form-based process. And I can think, of several customers right now and several products that I use where the form was the only way to do it before, and they spent all their time perfecting the form and optimizing for the form, and it's just getting in the way. And that's why people are going to use their favorite AI to do all their shopping. It's why they're just going to say, I want this kind of thing. Who should I buy it from? And probably why you're going to start seeing ads appear in ChatGPT and the others.
I firmly believe that if your product or service is fundamentally a form, then you need to rethink it relatively quickly, because if it's a form, it's a free-for-all. Yeah, you could say that everything's a wrapper on chat, but equally everything before that was just a CRUD wrapper, right? It was a wrapper on cloud services. It's just a different way of getting the data into the system. And all those SaaS products, which are just pretty forms, which is 9.9% of all SaaS products, need to fundamentally rethink the way that they provide those services to their clients and their customers, because their customers are being forced to change the way they work in their lives, like in the place where they spend all their lives. Is that the world is shifting underneath them. So we're going to expect that in the consumer space as well. So many product owners are just completely oblivious to this at this point as well.
Well, SaaS products are probably the new training ground for the future LLMs, because those LLMs will just spit out full-blown UIs on demand when you need them.
Yeah, interesting. So I think maybe I feel like we've given away like the next $1 billion unicorn idea here.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to go off and build an appraisal system straight after this, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we should do a whole episode on how to be a product owner, what it means in the agentic world. I think that could be quite interesting. There's so much space there. So.
Yeah, what else? I think, some of the stuff we've been looking at this week has been quite interesting. There's been a lot of talk about LLMs starting to bottleneck. And, some people, I think his name is Yann LeCun, the chief AI scientist at Meta, and he's been very vocal about the fact that we're not going to achieve superintelligence just with LLMs. They know language, but they don't know anything about the physical world, and you can't have superintelligence where it doesn't understand facts about the physical world and it can't reason about the physical world. Which is interesting because I guess parallel story to this is that OpenAI has been pilfered recently. The amount of people on Twitter this week that ex-OpenAI that are going, "Oh, I've just started my new job at Meta." There's been a lot of them, and it's because Meta are building this superintelligence team, and Jan is heading that up. And Jan is the guy who's been very vocal about the kind of LLM cap and that we need this other thing or other things to develop to enable superintelligence. It's interesting. Everyone's given up on AGI, artificial general intelligence. That's yesterday's news. It's all about superintelligence now.
Is it just a marketing term? I think everyone they all talk about the same thing as they were talking about before, that people didn't like AGI. It got exposed.
Yeah, they need to keep ratcheting up the rhetoric to justify the exuberant salaries, I think. So yeah, he's a big proponent of this thing called JEPA, which I've only come across recently, the last couple of weeks, and that stands for Joint Embedding Predictive Architecture. There you go. There's a mouthful that you won't remember.
No.
But essentially, LLMs are large language models, and they're trained on a corpus of text so big that that it sucks up the whole internet, and they transcribe videos and all that kind of stuff. And we are where we are today. JEPA is a new architecture which aims to train models to think in the physical space. So this started off as a research project, I think, with images. So what they would do is they'd take source images and then they'd kind of black out bits of them. And the JEPA model, as it's called iJEPA for image JEPA, was trained on how to predict the missing bit of the image.
Okay.
So that it can reconstruct the image. But the important thing that's going on here, that is really important that you understand this, is it's not working in the pixel space. So it's not just trying to predict pixels, it's trying to understand the relationships between this part of the world that it can see and this part of the world that it can't see. And just like large language models have this internal vector space, which is kind of their brain, right? It's understood concepts about language and the closeness of one word to the other and the context in which they're used. And this embedding and understanding is what's baked into an LLM. But in the same way that an LLM has that concept with words, this is developing that internal concept about things. And so yeah, they started with images, iJEPA, and then they got that. It kind of did it and it worked, and it blew a lot of tests out of the water. And then they've moved on to videos, VJEPA, and they trained it on gazillions of YouTube videos. And because they're moving images and they're largely based on stuff in the physical world, it can now predict, given it can see a car here, it can predict that it's going to move here. It starts this internal representation that it has that we don't understand because nobody really understands how these models work under the hood. It's kind of embedding learnings about physics without being told anything about physics. And so it's the thing to watch. I think you're going to hear a lot more about this. I think it's going to be one of the new technologies that eventually is combined to create this idea of superintelligence. We need multiple things. We need language. We need physical based models, and we probably need a few other things that we don't know we need yet.
Yeah, there's so many things sparking off of that. The idea, I guess that makes sense. So if by using the video and the images, you can represent objects and understand them in context, and therefore how they behave in context with other objects, you could see how, without teaching it Newtonian physics, it would figure it out. Because that's how Newton figured it out from observation, right? and then told the rest of us. You could see how that would happen.
I still think this is all mental, isn't it? I kind of alluded to this earlier in the week. People are getting so au fait with LLMs, and they're saying, "Oh, it's just a prediction engine, but it just predicts the next word." It's like, yeah, it does, but think about how much it has to know about language and about concepts, human concepts that have been recorded in language, to be able to predict the next word. Because it's not just predict the next word, is it? It can spit out a really compelling story or an amazing narrative or a deep research project or a marketing plan.
Mm.
It's got an intrinsic understanding about concepts and languages and closeness of one thing to another thing, as well as factual data that it's been trained on, obviously, and not go off and query the internet. So it has some model that we are still trying to understand. Likewise, this JEPA thing has a model that we don't really understand, but like you said, it's learnt things through its training, through understanding that, I've got a video of a ball that's bouncing and there's a pavement here, but it's blacked out. What's going to happen in the frame? Well, I know the ball's going to bounce up because I've learned that now. And then it kind of, maybe it figures out that every ball bounces back at 9.81 meters per second or something. It's like you said, it develops understanding, but it's pure, isn't it? It's pure. It's pure observational understanding.
Yeah, exactly. And that observational stuff is how science originated, right? And obviously, the whole bunch of theoretical stuff happens in the background. Now that's taken us in a new direction. But those early days, it was all observation.
And one of
therefore this.
One of the big things with superintelligence, and you'll hear Sam Altman and Jan and the like talking about this, is they think a big hallmark of that is when it creates new science. If you want an AI to be able to create new science, then it's got to be able to observe stuff in the real world and come to its own conclusions. And I guess, thinking off the cuff now, JEPA kind of takes it in that direction a little bit, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you could imagine, you imagine sticking it next to Newton back in the day. Does JEPA come up with the same conclusion? It's going to come up with a different conclusion at some point, isn't it?
And surely the next logical step is, well, we've done it with images, we've done it with videos, let's do it with computer games because they're actual 3D environments. But maybe you could give it, rather than just the video, you're giving it the actual, somehow the 3D geometry. And then when this is where, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think, but this is why robotics is so important. And when we've got robots that are out there doing things, they can actually start pulling in the data that is going to help them to train a different kind of intelligence because they're sensing and moving within the real world. So again, they're being able to build a model that previously those kind of AIs and neural nets weren't able to build.
Yeah. You can see how this could apply to, certainly we were talking about autonomous vehicles last time. Yeah, the idea of vehicles being able to understand the intent of other road users, for example, and therefore knowing what to do next. Rather than, I don't actually know too much about this, but I think they just react really fast at the moment, don't they? They kind of see issues and they know the rules, and therefore they make a decision based on, and they're just really good at it. But they're not actually predicting that kid's going to walk into the street. They just know the kid's there and they're ready for it if it does.
Right. Well, let me tell you about the other thing then. So JEPA was the first thing. I've been looking at this for a couple of weeks, but something that only hit my radar a few days ago. I think, a couple of days ago, there was a new article came out in Nature about a new model. That wasn't really a new model, called Centaur. And this is, well, the article describes it as an AI model that's been trained to model human cognition and predict what a human is going to do next. Now, when I looked into this, it's not some brand new model. It's actually just taken an LLM and it's fine-tuned it on a data set on 160 psychological experiments that involve over 60,000 participants. I think anyone can get this data set. It's called Psych 101.
Is it done in like the 1940s and they like attaching electrodes to people?
Yeah, well, kind of, and kind of psychological experiments that are recorded and then somehow explained such that an LLM can understand it. So yes, it was based off some kind of llama model, I think, that they fine-tuned, and it turned out that it could predict, I think it was 80% accuracy or something, or 60 to 80% accuracy, what a human would do next, given a bunch of pre-existing.
I mean, I'm about 15%, maybe, and that might be generous. Maybe 5%.
Yeah,
we all think we can predict people, but none of us can.
Well, I thought it was fascinating on two levels. One, that it worked, and two, that they did that just by fine-tuning a language model, because you wouldn't necessarily draw a connection between explaining something in language and being able to understand a human's psyche.
I guess, yeah, because what people say they're going to do is very different often to what they actually do, or even what people think they're going to do is often very different to what they actually do. Even what people think they've done is often very to reality. So yeah, interesting.
Maybe I need to get a copy of the model, and then I won't have to live my life anymore.
That might be quite useful in family settings, you know.
What am I going to do next? Okay, well, I'll
The
do
great way
that.
you can get your wife, maybe. I don't know. What are we going to do next? So there are a couple of other things going on this week. I saw that there's an ongoing copyright thing going on with this AI piece, particularly around text that we've talked about, but it's going to be increasingly so with music and video and news stories, these kind of things about how the model providers and model creators are training on copyrighted material. This has been bumbling along forever. We've derided it sometimes when suggesting that people need to get with the times, but we also acknowledge the fact that people need to get paid, and there's genuine concerns, particularly in the creative industries, about not getting the value, I suppose, that has been generated by the AI companies off the back of their work. So, landmark case, Anthropic were being taken to court by a relatively small number of creators in the US. And it turns out Anthropic have got over 7,000 copyrighted books in their central library. This is information that was found and released by the judge as part of his judgment. And they've used these books to train the AI. But apparently, this is not an infringement of US copyright law. Now, I think there's differences between the US and the UK and the EU, but this was cited because the use of the books was exceedingly transformational. That was the term it used. Because the use of the material was exceedingly transformational, they were allowed to be used in the generation of new material under US law. Because it wasn't a race to copy them, it wasn't a race to replicate them, to generate the same thing over and over again, but instead were being used to create new things. It wasn't a copyright infringement.
And I guess they bought the books in the first place.
Maybe, yeah, I guess so. Maybe they bought the books, but that doesn't mean you've got a license to use them commercially, I guess. So, but yeah, and because they were using them commercially, which I think would have been a breach, but because the commercial use was exceedingly transformative, it kind of got them around that. And because they weren't producing copies, but they were using it to create new material, felt that again that wasn't in breach, which doesn't really answer the case of the people, I guess, who were worried that they weren't getting paid for the book's use. But it seemed like a bit of a fudge. It was an American thing because obviously they don't want to handicap or tie up the technology industry in the US. It's a big export. They don't want to stop that advance. China's not going to stop it. So America's got to march on. So you kind of wonder if there was something in that. But at exactly the same time, Cloudflare, who, again, staggering numbers, apparently a fifth of the internet is hosted on Cloudflare. That's nuts.
Wow.
And including lots of major news outlets like AP, Sky News, BuzzFeed, lots of others. They have got an ongoing battle, an ongoing war with the bots. And you may remember we talked about this. They released Labyrinth for some idea of creating this rabbit warren of fake content that the bots get lost in and just generate rubbish. Well, the next phase of this is they've basically created a switch, which apparently can block the bots. So I don't quite know how it works, but they claim now they've got a switch that you can turn the bot access off. So the crawlers that are crawling the sites and dumping the content into the training, you can turn it off. You can block those bots with a future view. And this is interesting off the back of the other case, the future view to enable you as the owner of the site and the creator of the content to sell access to the crawlers. Apparently they what was the quote? It was something like, yes, that's it. Yeah, the bots break the unwritten agreement in not sending the user back to the source and thus depriving the creator of the potential exposure and income. And that's what Cloudflare are trying to rewrite. They're basically, they're not going on some big kind of copyright, anti-copyright. It's illegal. They're saying that the bots and the AI companies are breaking the unwritten agreement that they are not citing their sources and sending them back. So I thought that was fascinating in this kind of war that's going on between the advancement of technology and the wonderful things that AI can do against the creators that on which, the giants, I guess, on which the shoulders they're standing. Don't know which way it's going to play out, but both sides don't seem to be letting go.
No, I don't know. I mean, if I wanted to read 7 million books, then I could do that, and I could, having read those 7 million books, I could put out my own thoughts and publish those thoughts on those books, and there's no copyright infringement there, right? But being able to do that to 6 billion people, when that's your reach, is that a copyright infringement? I think it's less clear with artists than it is with kind of books. If you're copying the artistic style of someone, again, I could do that, or I couldn't do that. A clever faker or painter could paint in the style or draw in the style of someone. That wouldn't infringe the copyright. But if you sold a fake, that's not really on.
It was really interesting that the judge framed it in that way, because it then becomes about reach, doesn't it? Which is a big part of what the digital age has really all been about. The fact that you can now reach markets and audiences that were never possible before. As you say, I mean, you could consume all the books, you could write a new work or write your thoughts based on the input of those books. But your newsletter subscribe list might be a few hundred, and you might be able to sell to 10% of those, and you make a few quid. The fact is, these guys have got reach billions and they're charging at least 20 quid a month for that.
But also getting in murky water now, because we know that these providers have done deals with Reddit and they've done deals with The Guardian. So if they are, in one sense, paying access to their content, but they previously haven't paid authors to any access to their content, then there's a differential there, isn't there?
Yeah, it is. You're right, and I think it will end up being quite groundbreaking, that ruling. And I think it's only relevant in the US, but because it's the first one we've seen that really puts that stake in the ground that says, actually, guys, this is not about the copyright. It's about your lack of reach. That's what we're saying. We're saying these guys have got a longer reach. They're going to make loads of money that you could never have made because you haven't got the reach. And that it's a horrible tension, and it's a tension that the industries have been through before. It's why Amazon blew corner shops out of the water. It's why the high streets died when Amazon turned up, because they've got reach and that convenience and that ability to get to everyone.
I'm quite a pessimist about it, really. Everyone, you seem to be a bit helpless. If big tech wants to go and do this thing, it eventually does this thing. Remember when cameras came out I'm old enough to remember when cameras came out on smartphones, right? And people started just taking pictures everywhere. All of a sudden you could be on anyone's camera roll. Now, that was a new thing at one point. Nobody don't even think about it anymore. But at the time, that was a huge privacy debate that happened. And, you were banned from taking them in various places. And, it was all over the news. But now nobody even thinks about it, do they? Really?
Yeah. Interesting. So, feels like a digital economy case now rather than a copyright case. We'll see. But obviously, Cloudflare haven't given up the ghost yet, and they've got some good publicity on it.
That'll be interesting to watch. I would expect some pushback there.
And also, surely there's just a technology arms race. I mean, you would have thought the crawlers could get round whatever it is, Cloud. So, I mean, I don't know how it works, but it feels like a bit of PR to me. Well, on that bombshell, I think that's the pod.